Greetings, everyone. I'm excited to welcome Apurv Bansal, co-founder and CEO at Zenskar. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah, great to have you here. Looking forward to this discussion and the software that you're building. But first, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so this is my second company. Started my first company about 10 years ago, sold that. After that, worked at Google for some time and I was in their payments business. And that's kind of when I realized that companies as large as Google were building kind of in-house tooling to automate their billing and revenue operations across different verticals within the business. That's around the same time, when I met my co-founder Saurabh, and he was at that time, working as head of product at a startup in New York City, and he was actually building an in-house billing system at that company, and he had built one at his previous company. And we were like, man, this is not how something as core as billing should be, done. And that's kind of what prompted us to start this company.
Yeah, really interesting because I've just completed my sixth annual tech stack survey, and in the billing invoicing category, you do see homegrown kind of
Yeah.
pop in there, which I never recommend because that just seems like so much to build in house and then maintaining it. And of course, there are a lot of great solutions out there. Now, I'm curious now, your first company that you sold, was that in the same space or completely different than what you do now?
That was B2C e-commerce, completely different. So it's only after I went to Google that I kind of got interested in more software.
Okay, interesting. Completely different space than Google, kind of maybe genesis for the idea for Zenskar. So yeah, tell us what products and or services Zenskar offers.
So we're an entire revenue automation platform. So we do everything within order to cash. So it starts all the way from billing, then we do collection. So once the bill is sent out, we help with collection of payments, recognition of revenue. That's a core part of our platform and one of our strongest selling points. And then analytics or reporting around SaaS metrics, which I know is one of your favorite topics. So all of those under one umbrella, launching our own CPQ module in the next couple of quarters. So that'll kind of complete the full quote to cash suite. But today we're more order to cash. So and the primary pillars of the product are really billing, rev rec, and SaaS metrics reporting.
Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting how this category has evolved. Before, kind of disparate solutions, maybe do invoicing here, RevRec here, and I don't know what you call it. I just call it kind of subscription management now. And I'm curious. Also, you see other people saying, "Well, I don't call it order to cash. I call it something else." Maybe they're trying to coin their own term. But tell us, with this platform, so revenue automation, billing, RevRec, metrics reporting, who's your ideal client that you're landing right now?
Yeah, so the ideal customers for us are, B2B, some kind of any company that has some element of complexity in their pricing, which then leads to complexity in billing. So I'll break down what complexity in pricing really means. Complexity in pricing comes from two angles. One, if you have a sales-led motion. If you have a sales-led motion, your salespeople end up, crafting creative deal terms. You'll have discounts and credits and, rebates and ramps and milestones and whatnot. Salespeople want to, add those terms to go close a deal, and that creates headaches for the finance team to kind of invoice and then kind of recognize revenue for. So any kind of sales-led motion causes complexity in pricing, and that B2B companies with the sales-led motion, more recurring billing. So software is, of course, a big category for us. Any kind of SaaS company, AI companies, fintech companies, but we're also kind of seeing interest from more offline businesses that are launching digital, offerings. So transportation and telecom and more logistics industries that have a SaaS-like pricing model. And the second element where complexity comes from is if you have any kind of usage in your pricing. So anytime you're billing on API calls or billing on data being stored or billing on, let's say, number of deliveries if you're a logistic company, number of transactions if you're a payments company, all of those kind of also cause some kind of complexity. And that is where, we really shine.
In thinking about the order to cash cycle, are they starting the journey with your product and ending in your product, or are there integrations where it starts first, maybe in a CRM system that pushes over to Zenskar?
It depends. So a lot of them have a sales-led motion, in which case, we sit in between the CRM and the ERP. So we get the data regarding the contract or the pricing terms from the CRM. We do the billing, the rev rec, the reporting, and then we push the journal entries and the payment information into the ERP. Sometimes companies actually don't have a sales-led motion, so they're not using a CRM. It's a product-led motion. I mean, they're still using a CRM, but the information in the CRM is not fully, it's not complete, in which case, we link with APIs to your website, and then we send in with your internal data warehouse and your ERP. But yeah, we usually sit in between between the CRM and the ERP.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then what about, is there a certain revenue size or threshold? Because I know billing complexity could dictate when companies need a solution like yours. I mean,
Yeah.
is there a certain revenue size where then they pass that threshold where it makes sense to look at a solution like yours?
Yeah, honestly, initially we thought we'd only see interest from bigger companies because that's where the complexity would be higher. But as of this point, even pre-revenue companies are kind of approaching us because they're like, there is complexity and they need to sort out billing before they can even launch their product. But yeah, if I had to kind of go narrow, I'd say anything north of 10 million and then all the way up to, a couple billion is where we see all the complexity. Below 10 million, you were still at that stage where you could use Excel and you don't really need automation. And yeah, the need for automation becomes lower in that case.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely you're a needed product eventually, right? You got your core ERP, but now maybe we need something better for invoicing. Of course, you have to have RevRec if you have a recurring revenue business. So must have solution. So let's talk some stats and figures next. What year did you found Zenskar?
We founded the company in 2000, so about 2.5 years ago. This was summer of 2022.
Okay. Summer
Yeah.
2022. And then do you have a headquarters location
We're based in New York.
based in New York? Okay, perfect. And then what about your current team size?
We're 38 people. Yeah.
Okay.
And so like half of them are engineers, engineering and design, and the rest is all go to market.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And then anything you want to share around ARR ranges, revenue ranges for the company?
I don't know how much I can share, but
Mhm.
yeah, we're at that point where we're nearing about 100 customers now. So all this growth has really happened in the last, I'd say, year and a half or so.
Okay. Okay. That's great. And so a little bit about your go-to-market motion. I assume you're trying to reach out to the CFO. Maybe it's a founder if it's pre-revenue or early stage, but tell us a little bit how you're finding your prospects.
So I'd say the ICP for us is when you have an in-house finance team. That's where, the need for automating billing and RevRec is super critical. And so we go after finance teams because they also kind of appreciate a system that does both billing and RevRec and want something kind of all under one roof. How we're finding our prospects, there's like 2 or 3 different things that are working for us. One is, of course, outbound. People say outbound is dead, but not really. Like it's working very well for us. And then now, honestly, the last, couple quarters, a lot of it has just been like inbound, word of mouth, referrals. Once we got an initial customer base kind of kicking in, they started to refer their peers. So that started to come in. And yeah, a little bit of paid, but not too much. Like more is just like, we've been able to build a little bit of a brand now. And so word of mouth and plus the outbound, of course, is one of the core channels for us.
And when you're pitching a prospect, looking at their current tech landscape, are you usually going head to head with other competitors in this, or is it more they need to replace an existing system, or they really have no system in place that they want to put you in?
It's a mix of all. So we come under 3 situations. One is if you're just replacing Excel. So there's no system in place. You have Excel and you want to replace Excel with a tool. Second is, you're using some other competitor of ours, a legacy vendor that you put in place, but as you're scaling, that vendor is not able to kind of scale with your business because you're launching newer pricing models, you're launching newer products, and they were built just for plain vanilla per seat per month, per user per month kind of pricing. So, and the third is homegrown systems where, they've built something in-house. So we see all 3, honestly. Of course, in smaller companies, we see more of the Excel-based processes. In larger companies is usually replacing a third-party vendor or replacing a homegrown solution.
Yeah, makes sense. Quite a variety, I'm sure, when you're going into those competitive situations. And I was just checking out your pricing page and it says custom pricing or call for pricing. So tell us a little bit about your pricing models. Is this subscription? Is this usage? Is it both?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. Honestly, it varies a lot on what modules you're using. You could be using just billing, you could be using just RevRec, you could be using billing and RevRec, you could be using SaaS metrics reporting. So that is one part of it. But honestly, a large part of it just depends on, hey, how many customers are you invoicing? And what is the second kind of more qualitative angle is what is the complexity in your billing, which, we have our own ways of kind of figuring out by working with customers, where it really boils down to, okay, there could be two customers, both have, two customers of ours, both have same number of, customers of theirs, but one has a lot more complexity, one has lesser complexity. And so the price for the one with less complexity will be lesser. So that's the third.
Okay. Okay. And then, a little bit about the usage, then say if they have some sort of usage model that they need to hook up, is that then something you can also integrate to feed in that application data create the pricing, create the bill?
Yeah, and actually that is one piece, we were built natively to handle usage. So that's one piece we do literally better than any other vendor out there in the market. So typically there are, most of our competitors, they offer what we call an API based route of ingesting usage. So let's say a customer can use our APIs to send data to us, which we also offer. But the problem with that approach is, it requires engineering bandwidth from our customers to hook up into our APIs and send data to us, which not everybody, it's very hard for a finance team to get engineering bandwidth to implement a billing solution. So what we did is we actually came with another way where we can hook up into their data warehouse. So typically they're storing consumption data in, let's say, a Snowflake, a MongoDB, a Postgres, somewhere, one of those. So we can hook up directly into their data warehouse and extract the consumption information. And that completely eliminates the need for any engineering dependence that the finance team needs to go implement the billing solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
So the implementation time down significantly.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And then let's switch over to the fundraising side. And I know it looks like you've raised some capital. Well, how much capital have you raised to date?
We raised about 7 million, and this was led by Bessemer. And honestly, more than half of it is still in the bank, which is great.
Good.
Because, while we have a reasonably large team now, of course, we have, decent amount of revenue coming in that reduces the burn significantly. So we're not really, we're in a good place where we don't really, urgently need to raise more. And we're just secretly hoping that our revenue kind of just, gets us to profit sooner than we need to raise.
And when was that investment?
About 2 years ago now.
Okay. So 2 years ago. And it seems like, I run my tech stack survey. You see all these different categories, and like FP&A software, really hot space. Still popular space, ton of investment. Plus, then bigger companies buying out FP&A software. And it seems now, whenever I look, there are more invoicing solutions out in the marketplace. Maybe not just dedicated recurring revenue, but just more invoicing, more RevRec. You're just seeing now. This seems to be a very hot space. I mean, are those conversations that, if you remember, I don't know, 2 years ago, a long time ago, but just those conversations about like what the marketplace looks like, where, there are just tons of solutions, but then also some people think, well, if they're competitors, it means there is a market there to go after.
Yeah, see, I mean, according to me, any large market where there is a real pain point, it will be competitive. That's just how capitalism works. If there is a pain and there is a market and it's large enough, there will be competition. I think the main thing that investors look for is, do you have a differentiated offering? Like, can you uniquely describe how you are different from your competition? And is that compelling enough for your customers? And we have enough product differentiation. Like when people see our product, they're like, hey, this is like leaps and bounds above, the more legacy vendors out there. So it's really about knowing how you're different, being intentionally different, and then communicating it well.
And with that 7 million raise from Bessemer, led by Bessemer, say about 2 years ago, had you planned on raising capital, or did something happen in the business where it just made sense to raise some money?
No, we definitely planned to raise money because, we needed, the surface area of a product is pretty large. And it's pretty complex. There's billing, there's RevRec, there's reporting, there's collections, there's usage tracking. And to build that kind of a product, like you really need a relatively larger engineering team than most companies that start out. So to put in that engineering investment, we definitely needed to raise capital. And that's why we raised the money. So it was very, very intentional.
Okay. Yeah. And that makes sense. You see a lot of products where, yeah, just that build is so intense that you need that capital kickstart. Otherwise, maybe take forever to get to the MVP out the door. And I don't know if you remember 2 years ago with Bessemer and those conversations with investors, but any kind of lessons learned in that process. Bessemer, well-known investment firm. I'm guessing they were asking a lot of good questions about your product market. Any
Yeah.
lessons you could pass along to other founders from your fundraising experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a couple of things. One is, if you're in a crowded market, the first question you get asked is, hey, this is a crowded market. There are the vendors. Why will you win? And you really need to believe that you will win. And once you believe it, then you can communicate it to investors, communicate it to customers. If you yourself don't believe that you have a compelling offering and you're just like a me too, then it's hard to communicate that differentiation. So believing that, you're better than others and communicating that really goes a long way, because honestly, like, investors know a lot less about your space than you do, because they're not dealing with the problem that you're solving on a day-to-day basis. They know it at a superficial level. No disrespect, of course, they understand the market. They're not, sitting with those spreadsheets, trying to kind of create journal entries and posting it to the ERP. That's not what they're doing. So they don't know the pain. They're kind of riding on your belief, and your belief that you communicate comes from your own self belief. So that to me is, if you believe in yourself and you can communicate that well, you're able to convince investors to write a check.
Yeah. Yeah. No, appreciate that insight. And Apurv, at this stage of your business, do you have a favorite number or metric that you're using to guide the business?
Yes, there are a couple, but right now the main thing that I am looking at is dollar value spent per dollar of pipeline generated. Because we're at that phase where we're, trying to scale now, and there's a bunch of, different avenues for spending on go to market. And, we want to be a capital efficient business. So we really track that very, very closely. How much are we spending for every dollar of pipeline that we generate?
That's interesting because I love the metric, the cost of ARR, that looks at the cost to acquire $1 of net new ARR, but you're looking actually before that in the pipeline. So which is really interesting. So what, like, is there a number that would be a good, like, if for other people, like, hey, I should implement that metric, like what would be a good number for that?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, the ideal metric to look at is dollar value per dollar of ARR. But in our business, the sales cycle is pretty long.
Mm-hmm.
And, I may generate pipeline today. It'll take X number of months to close. And that X is actually much larger than for other businesses. So that's the second metric we look at, but not the first metric we look at. Because I want to pipeline I generate today, it may close in 6-8 months. And then, of course, the holy grail for me is, okay, if I spend $1 of revenue, spend $1 of on go to market, can I generate at least $1 in revenue?
Mm-hmm.
And, then you need to look at your conversion rates. If you're closing for every dollar of pipeline, closing, 25 cents in revenue or 22 cents in revenue, then that just kind of becomes, okay, for every dollar of spend, are you generating $4 to $5 of pipeline?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm guessing, yeah, maybe like for every dollar spent on go to market, maybe you get, yeah, $4 to $5 a pipeline. Yeah, which is, and I'm guessing, yeah, qualified pipeline. So,
Right.
yeah,
Of course.
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. I love that. I love that. Well, appreciate you sharing your journey and experience so far with, since founding in 2022. So what's coming up next for Zenskar?
I mean, for us, up until now, it was really like getting the product to a place where, it's able to kind of hands down, beat the competition in the market, and not by, not on price, but on value. And just by, now that we've done that, now it's really about scaling our go to market. And we have a couple channels that are working. So just doubling down on them while we continue to explore more channels. Like, I realize that for any business, the channels that work for you in your 1 to 5 million journey, and then the one in your 5 to 20 million journey, and then the ones in your 20 to 100 million journey will all be different. So while you need to kind of focus on what's working today, you also need to be thinking about, hey, what will give me revenue 2 years later when these channels stop working? Because making any new channel work, at least for me, has taken 2 attempts and at least a couple of quarters, if not, more. So it's always kind of better to start sooner. So you give yourself time to experiment, fail, and, be ready for that next phase in your growth.
And yeah, get the product where you can beat your competitors. And again, not just like the lowest price, which this is definitely a solution where you just not want to, just try to take the lowest price solution out there. But I always advise founders as I'm working with them. It's like, hey, if we don't have RevRec in place, good invoicing, like you need subscription management. And oftentimes I find as they talk to different vendors, there's a bit of a sticker shock. And, as a CFO, I'm like, hey, this is money well spent, right? You need this, you need bulletproof RevRec. You've got to have this data in place. You pass your audits, correct invoicing. And what do you see in the market as you put the pricing out there? Is it like, yeah, that makes sense? Or are they surprised that just the price of subscription management software?
It's actually a mix of both. Like
Mhm.
there's a set of customers that are like well educated and they're like, yeah, this is how much it costs because we've used other vendors in the past and, ballpark, this is where the price is and this makes sense. And then there's a second segment that's, is not as used to automation. So they're, in Excel and they're like, okay, they're comparing it, to the cost of doing it manually. I think what people don't realize is, you're not just automating your manual effort, automating it has second order effects. Like literally all of our customers, once they automate, they discover that they were underbilling their customers. And we help them, discover X percentage of revenue just being lost because they were underbilling. And like you can't quantify, you can quantify that, but people don't kind of think of those, value adds when they're thinking of automating their operations. So it's a mix. We see both kinds, honestly.
Yeah, it's a great point because this is a big piece of your tech stack and has to be right. And also, of course, I'm a big proponent as a CFO, but I was working with one client where we're trying to build out their MRO schedule, all their invoices, their customers, laying that out, and realized in that process, like something wasn't tying out, that their bookkeeper had forgot to invoice a bunch of customers that cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. And
Yeah,
like you said, revenue leakage or just plain forgetting to invoice some customers, and
yeah,
that will more than pay for that investment.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, because, when you're overbilling your customers, they'll tell you, hey, you sent us an extra amount. When you're underbilling them, they won't tell you. So that's how you will know.
Yep. Yeah. And sometimes you have to find it yourself internally. So yeah,
Correct.
that's one of those things that yeah, you're kind of a worst nightmare if you're the CFO and that happens. So I really appreciate your time today, sharing your journey and experience so far, what's happened with Zenskar. If listeners would like to learn more, where should we send them online?
Zenskar.com. That's Zenskar, Zenskar.com.
All right, perfect. Well, if you'd like to learn more, level up your subscription management, check out Zenskar. So that's Zenskar.com. And Apurv, really appreciate your time today.
No, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.